Hello Fearless Gamers, Matt here for Fearless Games, and welcome to How to Play Battlefleet Gothic Part 1, here on Fearless Games. December is here, and our battle has just begun. While we wait for the Doran'Por Saga videos to be ready to be uploaded, I thought we would do some Battlefleet Gothic themed content here on the channel. And what better way to start this off than a how to play Battlefleet Gothic Remastered, which is the rule set we'll be using in the Doran'Por Saga series. For those who may not know, what is Battlefleet Gothic? Battlefleet Gothic is Warhammer battles in space. This is all the ship-to-ship naval combat that happens when armies are making their way to the different systems, because they don't just show up on the planets, they go in on these massive vessels, and a lot of times fleets will collide on the way there or during battles for supremacy to make it easier for the troops on the ground, and that's where Battlefleet Gothic comes in. This is where you can represent all those cool space battles that you read in the books and hear about in like mission briefings and whatnot. And personally, this is one of my favorite games out of the Warhammer series by far. Unfortunately, it went away when they got rid of Specialist games originally. They have been slowly bringing Specialist games back, so they might eventually bring back Battlefleet Gothic, but it's probably going to be Horus Heresy themed, who knows. And so in this video series, we're going to learn about how to play Battlefleet Gothic Remastered. What is Remastered? This was a fan project created by taking the 2007 digital rulebook that GW had posted on their website for free, and the 2010 compendium created by the High Admirals. This document was for cleaning up some language on some game rules that some were a little confused by, and made some alterations to existing rules, and made complete outright changes. This fan project took those two documents and combined them into a new format to make one whole document called Battlefleet Gothic Remastered. I like to think of this as this is second edition if Battlefleet Gothic was allowed to have a second edition, which again sadly never happened. For those that may be wondering, this was something that I had made up myself. This isn't something you could just go out and buy. You could just take the document, if you can find it. There's plenty of websites out there that have the PDF available. You can get it made up into your own book if you want. So that's just in case anyone's wondering where I bought this. I just had this made myself. So with that all out of the way, let's dive right into how to play Battlefleet Gothic Remastered. First and foremost, what are you going to need to play Battlefleet Gothic? You're first going to need a table. Preferable size is 4x6, but you can go bigger or smaller. You're just going to have to adjust your deployment zones to account for the bigger table space or the smaller table space. Like me, my table is way smaller than 4x6, so I had to adjust all the deployment zones in order for it to work. You're also going to need models. That's going to be the trickiest part, especially if you want to get official GW models. Since they're out of production, anybody that's selling them is going to be selling them for a premium price. So there are alternatives to this if you don't mind getting unofficial GW models. They're basically proxies, and there's a whole gambit of them. There's people that sell, there's game stores that sell their own little shit models. There's 3D files you can print yourself, so you do have options for alternatives. One thing, you don't need to worry about scale when it comes to those, and we'll get into that reason in a little bit. But you just have to find ships that you like and pick those up. You're also going to need a set of 6-sided dice. Any standard gaming dice that you can find, you're probably only going to ever use, I think in my case, I've only ever used the most 15 dice at any given time. So you're not going to need a whole lot of them. unlike like 40K or 30K, but about like 15, so like a standard set of 20-25 is going to cover you for anything that you're going to use that for. You're going to need a set of order dice. These will be also tricky to find because GW doesn't make them anymore, but there are alternatives out there. There's STL files you can download and print yourself. One of my favorite alternatives is the Command Dice by Baron of Dice. I'll put a link in the description. Check them out. They've got some cool sets of dice out there. You're also going to need a tape measure, one that has centimeters on it. I found this at Home Depot. I like it because it was really nice and compact. It was also my only option. They didn't sell any other tape measure that had centimeters, and I didn't want to spend a whole lot of money on a gaming tape measure just so I could have centimeters on it. So there, like I said, so as long as it has centimeters, you're good to go. You're also going to need some pencils and a fleet registry paper to write down your ships. You're also going to need this token here, the blast marker token, and this token, the bearing compass token. I'm going to put a link in the description for you to download these. These used to be files that GW gave away for free on their website, because again, they weren't really producing the kits anymore that came with the original cardboard materials, and all you need to do is print them out on some thick cardstock and you're good to go. And then, yes, you got your ships, you got your tape measure, you got your dice, you got your blast markers, you got your bearing compass, and that's all you really need to get started playing this game. Before we get into the game rules, there's a couple of principles we're going to need to go over first. First and foremost, space is huge, like ridiculously huge. So big, to try and represent it in the game is going to be impossible. So the game designers went with just picking a scale for the vessels where the models will look good with nice crisp detail. This is why scale is not important when looking for proxies. You don't have to sit there and go, oh, are these ships the proper scale for the game? What size are the ships supposed to be? Doesn't matter. Only thing that matters is you can see the ship and they are the size that you prefer. I've seen people do this with foot-long vessels, so it doesn't matter. What the game can scale up to different sizes, which is really cool. So because of this, what is important is the ship's base, because that's where all measurements are done from. So you see here, the stem of that ship, that's where the ship actually is. That's where all your measurements for movement and shooting all come from. The base of the ship, that is the close proximity to the vessel. This is where things that come in contact with that base are close enough where it could affect the ship. Kind of think of it like they're shields. And that's the real important part about this game, is making sure your ship bases are all consistent throughout your different fleets. In terms of where to get ship bases, you can get them from GW, they're their flight stands, or there are files out there with the bearing compass already printed on them, which are really cool. We'll get to that in a little bit. So you do have some options for that, but that's the most important thing, is that your ship stands and bases are all consistent throughout your army. The other concept we need to think about is 3D moving in a 2D space. Because space is such a wide open vacuum and you can go in multiple directions with your vessel, it's not like naval combat or anything like that where you only have one plane that you can move across. So because of that, they decide to go with simplicity with the movement. There is no determining if they're up or down or what have you. It's all just assumed it's done automatically. So if a ship is going one way and the ship cuts through that vessel, it's assumed they moved out of the way of each other to avoid collisions. This is, again, because they want to make the game nice and simple without making it overly complex. So to make things a little less complicated, when it comes to ship movement, it's just assumed that the ships move out of each other's way unless they're trying to ram each other, which we'll get into later. Other principle is dice rolling. Game uses D6s. You roll the dice whenever it's asked you to do so, and you check the result for determining what happens. And the way that this is written in the rules is you'll see D6, that means you're rolling a D6. If there's any kind of modifiers, that'll be represented like this. So d6 plus 2, you roll a d6, you add 2 to the result. d6 minus 1, you roll the d6 and minus 1 from the dice result. There also may be times where you roll multiple dice. That'll be represented like this. 2d6 with a modifier, 2d6 plus 2. You may also have multipliers to dice results, which would be represented like this. 1d6 times 5, dice result, times that result by 5. Simple enough. And when it comes to dice rolls, there is a concept of re-rolling. Re-rolling is just as it sounds. You roll the dice, you trigger a re-roll from some source, which lets you pick up the dice, roll them again, and that is the result you are stuck with, even if it's worse than the first one. And one big important thing, you cannot re-roll a re-roll, regardless of where the re-roll comes from. So, for example, if you have a ship that has some special rule on it that says it allows it to re-roll a order check, and you do so and it fails, you can't then use your command re-roll to re-roll that die again. Regardless, only one re-roll can be applied to a single dice roll at any given time. The next principle we need to talk about is the bearing compass. This guy right here. The bearing compass has two primary functions. The first being determining your firing arc, what weapons you can fire at an enemy vessel. So how you would determine this is by taking the center hole and placing it over the center of your ship's base, and that would determine which firing arcs are presented to your target. You got your starboard, you got your port, and your prow, and you also got your aft. But I don't think any ships really use that. I think the orcs may have one ship that uses that firing arc. And the second purpose of the bearing compass is to determine what facing is being presented to your firing vessel. Same deal, you place the bearing compass over the center of the ship's base, and that would determine what facing of the ship is facing your firing vessel. Real simple, and we'll go into this a little bit more in detail when we start talking about shooting. Now, the next thing we're going to be talking about in principle is setup. First, turns. A turn consists of two actions. Your actions and the player's actions. So, I get a turn, they get a turn, that's one turn. So, a 8-turn game will have 16 individual turns. 8 from me, 8 from my opponent. Simple enough. Now, in this game, pre-measuring is allowed. It's basically believed that they have all these advanced targeting systems calculating distance and ranges, so there is no secret to what the vessels are doing and how far away they are. That's easy for the computers to calculate, so pre-measuring is allowed. In terms of your army lists, you don't really need to keep that a secret. It's kind of like a friendly thing. You don't have to keep it super secret. The only time you may want to do that is if you're running a campaign, because you have different vessels you can use and you may not want the player to know what you're going to be taking at the time. So in this game, there are 3 ship types: battleships, cruisers, which has their own subtype of light and heavy cruiser, and escort. These are the 3 different types of ships that you can have in your fleet at any given time. Now, there's going to be times where the rules may reference capital ships. Capital ships are the battleships and the cruisers merged into one category. Essentially, to cut down on the wording in the rule books, when a rule applies to both of them, they just say capital ships, just to make it easier. So just don't be confused when you're like, oh, if you see a rule that says capital ships do X, Y, and Z, it's not your battleships or your command ship. It is any cruiser or battleship class. It's again just to make life easier. So now that we've gone over the different ship types, let's look at a ship data sheet. This is what your data sheets are going to primarily look like when you're looking at the fleet book list. And they're broken down to the following. We've got the type/hit. This is classifying the ship. In this case, it's a cruiser. And the /8, that means it has 8 hit points. We then have speed, which here is 20 centimeters. That means it can move a grand total of 20 centimeters in one turn. Then we've got turn, which is 45 degrees. This is how much of a turn it can make when it's moving. One way that I like to do this is a third kind of use for the bearing compass. I like to put it over the middle of the ship, and I use the front arc to determine 45 degrees. So if I want to turn it left, I'll shift it left and make sure it lines up with the left line of the front firing arc. That's how I do it. But like, again, if you get a flight stand that has the bearing compass printed on it, you don't have to worry about it. Then we've got shields. This is how many shields the ship has, which this one is 2. And then armor. In this case, this one has 2 armor stats, 6 front /5. That means when the ship is getting attacked at the front arc, which again you use the bearing compass to determine, it has an armor value of 6. Every other arc has an armor value of 5. And then our last one is turrets. That one is how many turrets that the ship has. Those are important when we get to the ordnance phase. Then you have armaments, and this is broken down to the name of the armament, the range that the armament has, the strength of the armament. This is basically how many dice you're going to be rolling, and which arcs it can fire out of. Now, we've talked a lot about bases in this video already, so let's just talk about them one last time to make some clarifications. There are 2 base sizes in Battlefleet Gothic, 32mm and 60mm. Which one is used for which ships? Very simple principle with that. If a ship or defense platform has 3 or more shields or has 10 or more hit points, it gets a 60mm base. Anything else, it gets a 32mm base. So again, using our example from before, as we can see, it's got 2 shields and 8 hit points. That means it would use a 32mm base. If you want, you can increase that size to a 60mm base. This means the vessel has what's called a tracking field. It's representative of what makes it easier for them to track onto vessels for ramming or boarding actions, and that's the two-edged sword to it. You get a bigger footprint for doing stuff like rams and boarding actions, but ordnance has to travel less distance to get to your vessel. So if you wish to give your ship a 60mm base, then it's really supposed to go on a 32, you can, but do so with caution, because you are putting your ship at risk as well as giving yourself a benefit. And now we come to the conclusion of this video. We've gone over what Battlefleet Gothic is, we've gone over what the remastered version is, we've went over what you would need to play the game, some basic principles about the game and how its rules are built, we've gone over the data sheet of a ship and how to read it, and we've also gone over how you determine what size base the ship's going to need. When we come back next week, we will go over the leadership stat of a vessel. We're also going to go over special orders and how they are utilized in the game with our very first phase of a turn, which is the orders phase. So, if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button, hit that little bell icon so you can find out when these videos come out, and give this video a like so it helps get it circulated. We'd really appreciate that. And also, I want to hear from you guys. Which rule set do you use? Do you use the remastered set? Do you use one of the other fan-made projects out there? Let me know. What fleets do you use? What fleets do you hate in the game? Drop it down in the comments. I want to hear from you guys. And so, thank you all for watching, and until next time, fearless gamers, take care.